A title reads, Learning and Teaching in Higher Education, a Journey Through Wibbly-Wobbly, Timey-Wimey Stuff. At the right of the screen, a web camera shows Ian Turner. He is a white man with glasses, he has short hair, is wearing a suit and a blue shirt, and his background has been blurred.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this inaugural lecture.
A name comes on screen, Professor Ian Turner, at the Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching.
I'm really honoured to be here and talking to my family, hi Grandma, my friends, my academic colleagues, some students, some graduates, and even my mentees from the SMF are here today. And it's amazing to see how many people have taken the time out of their evening to join me in this journey through wibbly wobbly, timey wimey stuff. So, to begin.
A photo shows Ian in conversation with two children. He's in a bright building and wearing a green t-shirt. The children are facing away from the camera.
So, I guess you already know this, but I absolutely love teaching. I always have done and I always will do. It's the one part of my job that gives me goosebumps. It's the one part of the job that I always look forward to. In fact, when I'm feeling a bit stressed about work or about things outside work, the world, when I get in front of the classroom, I find that it just completely evaporates and I lose myself in the moment. And I kind of hope the students feel the same, to be honest with you. But I've been thinking quite a bit about why do I love teaching so much? And I guess the start of my talk comes from a reflection on that very question. And this picture here, I suppose, encapsulates to me something about the way I teach. So this picture was taken in 2018 at the University of Derby's Family Fun Day. I believe I'm talking to some young family youngsters and their families about forensic science. You note that I'm dressed in my normal smart attire that I wear at the university. And I think I like this picture because it encapsulates the key thing I feel about teaching. And that word is fun. So some of you might be saying fun at universities, having fun whilst learning. Nah, what a load of rubbish. But I don't agree with you. I think fun is the most fundamental ingredient that we should have in an education experience. And I absolutely adore a quote by Aristotle. So it's a very old quote, but it says, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Basically, if you don't enjoy the learning experience, you ain't going to learn nothing. And I think I take that to heart in everything I do. And hopefully I'm going to convince you of some of that as we go through today's talk. So the first kind of thoughts when I was presenting this lecture, well, the first thing I did was I took advice from my children and I asked them, kids, what do you think I should do here? And I got two very wise words of wisdom. The first one was, Dad, don't be embarrassing. And the second one was, Dad, don't do any dancing. So hopefully I don't disappoint there. But after those words of advice, I decided that I'd do a bit of a reflection through my own education experience all the way back to when I was very small to see if I can understand where this sense of fun came from.
A photo shows Ian as a child in a monk's outfit. He's holding a Spider-Man toy. Text at the top of the screen says the origins of the game.
And the first picture I came across was this one. So this is me aged around 2. And you can see I've got a Jedi robe on there of some description and a Spider-Man on my arm. And I think this is the earliest picture that encapsulates the sense of fun. Some of you may be laughing at home at the picture, but to be honest with you, the only thing I'm wondering about is what my mum did with that Doctor Who and with that Spider-Man figurine. But it's worth a few quid now. And I think that I've taken that sense of fun all the way through my academic career.
Two new photographs appear. The first shows Ian as an adult in a Jedi robe with a Star Wars lightsaber. The second shows Ian looking rather like Doctor Who in a suit, shirt and bow tie. He's wearing jeans and has trainers on.
In fact, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody else who's managed to get away with coming to university dressed as a Jedi, a pirate, Santa Claus twice, even Doctor Who. I think perhaps the Lycra Spider-Man costume would be a step too far, but we'll see on that. So that sense of fun has always been in me. But where did that sense of fun come from? So what I did is I delved into my school reports, which I've kept all the way from primary school. And this one that you can see on the screen now comes from my year 6, so my last year of primary school. And it's a statement at the end of the work. And I'll just read a teeny little bit out to you. And it says, Ian is a quietly spoken, almost shy boy. He's very popular with his close group of friends. He's extremely reliable and polite and always willing to work hard. Now, I'm not convinced many people now would describe me as a shy and quietly spoken person. But in fact, this theme is in every single one of my school reports, all the way from year 5, all the way up till I got to A level. Then something changed. And the only other consistent feature in my school reports is that I have terrible handwriting and spelling, which I know my dad would not be nodding sagely at home to agree with. That's still the case. So what changed to me? What changed me? Well, I think one of the main things that changed me.
Several items are shown in this slide. A report card from Felixstowe Sixth Form, a flyer for a school play, and a photograph. The flyer says OHS Lower School Drama Club presents Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, printed on orange paper. The photograph shows 7 teenagers sat around a table which has 6 buckets on it. 6 of the teenagers are dressed in bikinis, grass skirts, and beachwear. The faces of these 6 have been made anonymous by adding clip art smiley faces. Meanwhile, the person sat in the centre of the group is wearing a gorilla costume.
Was a secondary school teacher I had called Mrs. Hatton. Now, Mrs. Hatton taught, well, she's a bit bonkers, but she was over the top and exaggerated in the way that she explained things. She really took that embryonic love of biology in me and cemented it into something solid, and it hasn't gone away ever since. I think that's the early roots of showing me how to teach properly and enthuse people. So hats off to Mrs. Hatton for that experience. In fact, she probably did too good a job, because if you look at this school report, you can see from my A-level biology, the first lines says he sometimes shows over enthusiasm, which can hinder his progress. And I'm pretty certain a few people in the audience, perhaps even a certain PVC dean, may agree with that statement. I think also at this time of my life, I came a little bit involved with amateur dramatics, and I got to play Willy Wonka in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory at school. And I guess this is an early nod to kind of what I call theatre-based teaching, which is something that I like to do with my undergraduate students on occasion. And both of these things carried through into my undergraduate days where I studied biology. So I've managed to find at least one picture from my undergraduate days that I could share with you safely with a family audience, which showed off these theatrical roots. And this is a picture on the bottom right from when we fundraising for Operation Wallacea, which is we're trying to go to Sulawesi in a conservation effort. And I think you can probably work out which one I am in the picture. Yep, I'm the gorilla. And just so you know, I'm not friends with the emoji family. I'm just protecting the identity of these people. So my last reflective point for looking back my school days, and definitely the most important one for me, was this.
A report card. A paragraph in handwriting in this section headed Leisure and Out of School Activities says Wargaming, brackets Warhammer 40k, and role-playing. Reading, brackets horror and fantasy. Listening to rock music, brackets Aerosmith, Green Day, etc. Playing on computer, brackets SNES. Watching Ipswich Town play, brackets I'm a season ticket holder, unfortunately.
So this is from when I was in year 7, so my first year of secondary school. And in my personal statement at the end, you have to write your hobbies. And when I read this, I was outstanded because nothing has changed since I was that age. So wargaming, okay, so I still love games, don't war game anymore, but I love games. I still like role play games. I still love reading, not horror, but I love fantasy. I still love music. I like playing computer games. And a little known secret, I'd sacrifice all the Star Wars and Doctor Who in the world for football, which is my greatest love. And that, unfortunately, you can see on that statement there, is incredibly poetic. You know, very much true today. So you're probably thinking now, what's all this got to do with learning and teaching? And what I'm trying to say to you is this sense of fun and these things I've had in me ever since I was a young boy really affect the way I feel about teaching now. And I want to start this story with a tale of 2 pyramids.
This slide is labelled A Tale of 2 Pyramids, a photograph of 2 pyramids in a desert with a blue sky, a large one on the right and a smaller one on the left. The larger pyramid has been divided into two, with the wide bottom half labelled active learning and the top half passive learning. The smaller pyramid on the left is divided into 6 bands, starting at the bottom with the word remembering, followed by understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating, and finally creating at the top.
So the pyramid that you can see on the left represents something that we call Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchical framework. There are in fact 3, which deal with the cognitive, the affective, and the sensory domains. And these are the skills that we want to generate in our students. And the ones at the top of the pyramid are the ones we really desire. So we want students to be able to be evaluating, creating things by the time that they leave us. In fact, this really applies to a game. If you think about a game like a chess, when you start playing chess the first time, the first thing is remembering the bottom part of the pyramid, the way all the different pieces move. Then you start to understand the interactions between the pieces before you start applying them and playing some games. After you play some games, you start analysing what you've done and evaluating that before finally you start creating your own strategies to playing chess and hopefully beating people. So that shows you the evolution process through this hierarchy. The pyramid on the other side is a crude representation of how students learn, where the thinner parts of the pyramid representing where they learn least. So they learn least in what we call passive learning techniques. So just reading about things, hearing about things, seeing things, and they tend to learn more when those things are done in combination or when they are actively involved as part of the learning experience. So if we just flip that pyramid around like this.
The large pyramid on the right appears flipped upside down on top of the original photo of pyramids.
I believe really to get the higher order skills, the creating and evaluating, then we should be adopting a very active learning approach to our teaching. And what do I mean by active learning?
A photo of a sandy desert with the horizon halfway up the image. On the very left of the image is a clip art of 3 bricks, and on the very right of the image is the pyramid with active learning on the bottom and passive learning on the top. A clip art silhouette of a man leading 3 camels is along the bottom of the photo. 2 of the camels are labelled active and learning. A double-ended graphic of an arrow joins the blocks on the left to the pyramid on the right, with text in 3 layers going between the two.
So I certainly don't mean doing a bit of Joe Wick's MBE whilst talking about molecular biology.
Ian mimes jogging on the spot.
Though I'm happy to give that a go one day if I think it will give some benefits to the students. By active learning, I simply mean allowing students to be part of the learning experience. They're not passive recipients, they are actually doing something. I mean, active learning is very much an umbrella term. And to be honest with you, most academics I've met in the entire HE absolutely subscribe to active learning and use parts of it in their teaching. And what this diagram here is showing is just some of my personal active learning activities that I like to include. There are many more. Now, the line across the bottom, which goes from bricks to pyramid, shows 2 things. Firstly, how much effort it takes me in terms of design in order to introduce into the sessions, with the least amount of effort on the left where the bricks are. And simultaneously, how much benefit I feel the students get from me introducing that approach. So, questions and a moment to pause for reflection doesn't take much effort on my part, but I still think for the majority of students the gains are relatively small. Whereas working up full case studies or doing problem-based learning takes some more effort, but I feel the gains for the majority are higher. And you'll probably notice that the one I didn't mention, the one which does take the most effort, but I feel it's got the absolute most impact, is game-based learning. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about in this session. So what is a game?
This slide is labelled "What is a game?". A clip art board game is to the left, an Xbox controller is in the centre, and a clip art of a mobile phone with an image of a sweet on the screen is to the right of this slide.
So if I say the word game, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? So some of you think about a game of football. Yeah, I know England are playing at 7:45 tonight, people. Some of you may think about a board game. Some of you may be thinking about a computer game. Some of you may be thinking about a mobile phone game. Perhaps maybe some of you are playing a mobile game at the moment whilst should be watching this talk. I mean, one thing that's really clear is games are an absolutely fundamental part of our society. So every major civilization since history has been recorded has evidence of games, and they go all the way back to 3500 BC games. Board games have never been more popular. The board game market has grown 365% and is worth over £7 trillion annually at the moment. It's a really big market. I mean, games is actually, even in our everyday language, there's so many game-based metaphors. You've got to play the game of life, game on. So games are really, really important to us. So playing games. Now, you notice I just said the word playing games. And I think it's really important here that I make a distinction between what play and games are.
A jumbled pile of colourful Lego bricks. A Lego Education logo is top right, and bottom right is a logo saying Certified Facilitator, Lego Serious Play. On a red Lego brick is the word play, and on a green one is the word learning.
So play is absolutely widely accepted as being a really important development tool in young infants and children. It's very much a free form activity. Games are play, but there are structure or boundaries, or if you want a more convenient word, there are rules around that play, and that's a distinction between the two. Perhaps a good example of play would be the Lego brick. So most people understand and have played with or seen people play with Lego bricks, and when you're very young, the play with the Lego bricks is building any structure that your imagination allows you to build. Well, Lego has been turned into a game by Lego Education. So this is by the Lego Foundation themselves, and they've turned lots of Lego bricks into an activity to enhance STEM education. It's incredibly successful. So play transitioned to a game. In fact, I do use Lego at work. So I was honoured to be made a certified facilitator in Lego Serious Play, which is a management and business training tool for helping companies come up with strategic aims and shared visions. And I've never come across a more powerful metaphor-based technique in my entire career. So this talk is not about play, it's about games. Though I will say I do think play does have a place in higher education as well. You've only got to look at things like maker spaces and game jams, which are these more freeform activities, to see some good examples of play. So I want to talk about games. Before I do, I do mention a term called gamification.
A colourful reward chart with Batman, Spider-Man and Captain America on the right-hand side. To the left is the word gamification. A weekly rota is shown with the heading My Tasks, featuring the tasks Play with Lego, Watch the Footy, Eat Pick and Mix, Watch Star Wars, Family Game, Go for a Run. Along the bottom is a space for adding stars and to make a note of rewards.
So there's really two ways that we can think about games in higher education. Actual games themselves, or just using the elements or the principles of games, and that's called gamification. What is gamification? So I guess it's probably best explained by this picture that you can see here. So this is a reward chart for a typical child, or in this case me. And the basic idea is that I have some tasks I undertake. And if I undertake those tasks, I get a reward, in this case a sticky star. And if I manage to collect all of those stars, then I will get a reward for doing so. Or perhaps it could be the other way around. If I don't get the stars, there's some punishment. Perhaps I can't watch TV at the weekend. So what this reward chart is trying to do is change behaviour. And that's what gamification's principle is all about. It's trying to change behaviour. In this case, it's doing it by either the proverbial carrot or stick and giving some intermediate awards through the use of sticky stars. Now, gamification, using the principles of games to change behaviour, is absolutely everywhere. And here's just a few examples.
The heading to this slide is Change Behaviour. The slide features an example of eBay feedback, a clip art jar with money in it and Please Donate written on the front, a Fitbit, an iPhone with a coffee shop loyalty app running, and a loyalty card which says Receive a 20% discount after 5 visits.
So perhaps the first and most obvious one are store cards. So if you were to look in your wallet or purse or whatever, I'm absolutely confident nearly all of us will have some loyalty cards for various high street stores and restaurants and such like. And the idea is you go in the first time, excuse me, go in the first time, they say, would you like a card? You get 5% off your order. You say, thank you very much. Every time you go, you swipe your card, you get some points. The more points you get, the greater rewards that you get. And then this card is used to enhance your experience by saying, oh, you haven't been for a while, would you like a free muffin if you come? You're trapped into the behaviour of brand loyalty because of these cards. So this has been on the high street for many, many years. Another great example would be the plethora of fitness-based devices that people wear on their wrists. So here the behaviour is about becoming fit, and here it uses the gamification principle of competition by setting you challenges of steps, by joining up with your friends and family to see how many steps they've done. So it's trying to change your behaviour there again. It even works in the charity sector. Now, all these sites which ask you to give money for causes have various levels. If you spend this much money, this is what your money will do. And then there's fundraising competitions. Once again, the competition element comes through. Even shopping online, and this is an example from a well-known selling platform. This is just gamification overload. All this reaffirming of the behavior that you were about to undertake to buy something and trying to give you trust and belief in the person that you're buying from. So what I'm trying to say is that behavior changing in gamification is all the way through society. So why shouldn't it be in higher education? So let's have an example.
The heading of this slide is Principles of Gamification. A large red arrow is pointing diagonally upward from left to right. On the bottom of the arrow is a yellow clip art cyclist.
So I want you to imagine that that's either you or somebody you know on that bike. And they've got to cycle up this incredibly steep hill. In fact, they don't think they can do it. Okay, they don't think they can do it. What may you do in order to help them cycle up that hill? What kind of strategies could you put in place to help them get up that hill? And I'm going to count down from 10 using my hands to give you a chance to think about that. 5, 2, 1. So what did you come up with? So I suspect you probably came up with some of the things that I can see on here.
The image changes to 6 icons over words. Top left are 2 cyclists chasing one another, one yellow and one blue, for the word competition. Top centre is an arrow pointing diagonally upward, but with steps cut into it, for the word levels. Top right is a pair of hands clapping for the word encouragement. Bottom left shows a trophy for the word reward. Bottom centre is 2 people on a tandem bicycle for the word collaboration. Lastly, bottom right is an icon of a countdown timer for the words time limit.
So one of the ways you may change behaviour is adding some competition, as resembled by another cyclist, perhaps cycling alongside. Perhaps you thought, well, we could give them a reward, you know, a carrot if they get to the very top. Perhaps you thought you'd make the challenge easier by putting some levels in. So you can see here that there's some steps on the hill. Perhaps you thought instead of adding competition, you get the cyclists to work together. So we've got a tandem. 2 people are doing the work, perhaps taking turns to cycle up. Perhaps you'd simply give them some encouragement and cheer them and buoy them on to do it. Or perhaps you'd use a stick and add a time limit. Now, these 6 things, and there are many more, perhaps you come up with something far better than that, are all examples of principles that you see in games that are used in society and can be used in higher education experiences.
We return to the image of a large red arrow pointing diagonally upward with a yellow cyclist at the bottom. The arrow has the word behaviour written on it now. At the top of the slide is an orange box featuring 2 columns. On the left is collaborative, trading, gifting, appreciation. On the right is competition, leaderboards, challenges, points, systems. There are signposts at the top and bottom of the arrow. The signpost at the bottom says narrative, theme, strategy, experience, quests, and Easter eggs. The signpost at the top says prizes, badges, progression, levels, awards, rewards, milestones, and points.
There's lots of principles of gamification, and here are just some of them. Generally, they're building on either a sense of collaboration, kind of working together, or competition. So a sense of collaboration, a good example of that is appreciation. A lot of us at the moment are using platforms like Microsoft Teams, and the old thumbs up icon to say that you like a post someone's made is a great example of a collaborative appreciation tool. And competition, we all know all about those. Just said example with the Fitbit, you know, challenging people through rewards and leaderboards and those kind of things. And then there's kind of two kind of branches of tricks used in gamification. One's are the kind of intrinsic stuff, so prizes and awards and badges, and one is more about the whole package, the story, you know, making the experience matter, giving a theme and a narrative to it. And both of these have roles. But for me, absolutely the most important principle of gamification that we can take resonance from in higher education is fail.
On the left is a bright red ink stamp of the word fail, but the word fail has been used as an acronym to make it stand for First Attempt in Learning. Underneath this is more text which says Freedom to Fail. On the right of the screen is an image from the computer game Tetris.
Freedom to fail. So let's start off with the example. So this game that you can see on the screen here is a game called Tetris. I'm sure most of you will remember it. This is from the Game Boy version. And the basic idea is you've got a series of blocks of all kind of different shapes, and they rotate round on the screen, and you've got trying to make straight lines. Now, the reason Tetris works, imagine you can only play Tetris like this. You got to have one go at Tetris. That was your practice go. Then after that, your second go, whatever score you got counted. I mean, that for me is a parallel, albeit a weak one, to formative and summative assessment in a university assessment. No. Tetris works because you can have lots and lots of goes. It doesn't matter to you if you fail, because you can try again and again and again. And it's not just about that. It's much more important, because you know that you can have another go and you can fail. You try things that you know will probably not work. So you think, well, what happens if I put these funny L-shaped ones on top of each other? Oh, well, that doesn't work. You take risks. You explore the boundaries of the scenario. And for me, that's exactly what we want the students to be doing. You know, we want them to have that. But fail is not sin like that. Fail sin is a very negative experience. If a student fails, they feel that they're inferior, they haven't achieved. They don't view fail as an opportunity to learn something else. They just want to remove it and get rid of it. In primary school, this is not the case though. So fail in primary school, it stands for First Attempt in Learning. And I think this is the really important game-based example. And when I get on to talk about some specific games in a minute, this is the essence of why I use games so much in my teaching, because of that culture it gives the students when exploring a topic.
The words thank you show on screen with each letter a different colour. Underneath the words are a selection of Nintendo computer game characters.
So, as you may be expected, I do want to thank some people as I'm talking today. And before I go on to talk about games specifically, I'd like to do just my first round of intermediate thank yous. So here, first of all, I'd like to thank my students and graduates. So I'd love to be able to name some specific people, but I might be here a long time and it's not really fair. But all I can say is the students make the whole thing worthwhile. I really love it when I learn from them as much as they learn from me. And my LinkedIn profile is absolutely littered with graduates, and it's always a pleasure to log on and see the little notifications about how successful you are. So thank you. The second group of people I'd like to thank here is just some of my colleagues. Once again, it'd be really unfair of me to kind of start naming people, because I see excellence everywhere I look in both the academic and professional service areas, and I'm always taking ideas and parts of ideas and trying them out in my own teaching experience. I would like just to mention a couple of kind of groups of people. First of all, I need to mention the Coffee Club. You know who you are. You've kept me sane over the years, so thank you very much. And I definitely want to thank my current team, the pedagogic practice team. I kind of struggled for a word to use, and the word that comes to mind is authentic. I think you're all completely authentic people, and you've allowed me to be completely authentic as well. And I think the journey over the last 2 years wouldn't be possible without you being like that. And finally, I think one person does deserve a named thank you. That's because lots of the things I'm going to talk about going forward are a synthesis of shared ideas. And when this person has always shared their ideas with me, and whenever I've shared my ideas with them, they've always bounced back stronger and more refined, and definitely spell checked. So I'd certainly like to thank Dr. Louise Robinson for everything she's done and opening my mind to the power of games in higher education. So cheers, Lou. So now we're going to talk about game-based learning.
This slide is labelled Game-Based Learning. On the left is the Nintendo character Mario, sat with a thought bubble showing a question mark. Filling most of this slide is what looks like a Monopoly game board, except the squares reference the University of Derby, with squares labelled for the north, south and east towers along the left edge, go to the VC's office instead of the classic go to jail in the corner, and sports centre, forensic training facility, Unibus number 6 and aquatic research facility along the bottom.
So we've talked about gamification, which is the principles of games. Now I'm moving on to actually using games full stop. So what do I mean by game-based learning? I simply mean using a game for a learning objective. So for those of you who aren't from higher education family, we often decide before anything starts what we want the students to achieve by the end of that. We call that a learning objective or a learning outcome. So in this case, I'm using a game for that specific purpose. So you're probably thinking, games in education? I'm not sure about that.
This slide is titled Games in Education and features a selection of images from computer game title screens with an educational twist. There is a lemonade stand, Fold It Beta with the tagline, Solve Puzzles for Science, Minecraft Education Division, Angry Birds, Timetable Rockstars, Assassin's Creed Discovery Tour Ancient Egypt, and the Philemon Project. There is also a screen grab of a streamer playing a computer game.
Well, games in education, I mean, I could talk for 10 hours on examples of games in using in education. In fact, when I was at school, I played a game called Lemonade Stand, perhaps some of you did as well, which was a business game where you had to mix the amount of lemons and the amount of sugar correctly to make the most money from your lemonade stand. So it's been around ever since then. My own children use a game in education to teach them times tables. It's called Timetables Rockstar, very, very popular. And it uses some of the things we've already talked about. It uses levels. The more times table puzzles that you solve, the more rewards you get and the greater rock star that you become. And it uses some of those competitive elements like time limits and seeing the leaderboard from your class to help change that behavior and getting you to learn your times tables. And I've seen its transformative effect myself. So that's a game that was very much designed for an educational purpose. There's lots of games, what I like to call commercial off-the-shelf games, which have also got powerful education remits. So a silly example perhaps, but I've seen Angry Birds used to teach trigonometry and calculating forces. Minecraft, which is incredibly popular, kind of a world building Lego brick type game, has actually got a special education edition, widely used in outreach for everything from primary school to introduce them to geological features, all the way up to University of Hull's excellent work using it to teach biochemistry. Some people are even going into the most popular games at the moment, such as Fortnite, which is what the image you can see on the top right, to talk to players. So climate change scientists have decided to get into the Fortnite game, not to do anything with the gameplay itself, but just while they're playing the game, talk to other players about climate change, and they've had good success. Some commercial games have specific educational packages associated with them, such as Assassin's Creed, which has a discovery tour designed by historians exploring ancient Egypt, and it's absolutely fantastic. And my last example here is a game called Fold It. So Fold It is a puzzle game designed by scientists at several universities in America. And it's a bit like Tetris, but with proteins. May not sound very fun to you at the minute, but basically it's a logical puzzle game. You've got to put these bits of proteins together in order. So this game has been an unparalleled success. So it has approximately 500,000 regular players. absolutely none of which have any kind of knowledge of science. But what the scientists do is they put real protein problems into the folded database, ones they can't solve in the lab. Then they ask the players to come up with what they feel their best solution will be. And once they've done that, they test it in the lab. And so far, there are 9 peer-reviewed papers in Nature and others from folded players. And one of the greatest examples, there was an AIDS protein which took had stumped scientists for 15 years in terms of its structure, but in 3 weeks these game players have come up with a plausible solution which was tested in the lab and proven to be correct. Fabulous. So games in education. You probably noticed, apart from a slight nod to biochemistry there, I haven't mentioned games in higher education, because when I do these talks to other audiences, people are normally okay up until this point. But as soon as you think games in a higher education experience, they're like, nah, you can't be serious. You know, there's no space for that kind of frivolity or fun aspect in a higher education curriculum. But I think you're wrong. I think you're very, very wrong. Let me give you an example.
This slide is titled Suitable for HE. To the left are 2 books, Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb and Science Communication, a practical guide for scientists by Laura Bowater and Kay Yeoman. 2 clip art televisions are to the right, showing respectively Doctor Who and Planet Earth.
Right, so let's start off with a book. So the subject I'm most passionate at the moment is science communication. I love teaching science communication. I think it should be core in every undergraduate science curriculum. COVID has shown us that. You know, we need our scientists to be able to communicate with all aspects of the general public in a clear and concise way and instill their passion to each other. This is a book, a science fiction book, and I don't think anybody would have any kind of umbrage with me using that as part of my teaching experience. This is also a book by my favourite author, Robin Hobb, but I don't think you'd see me using this as part of my teaching experience. So why? Well, because the content is different. They're both books, but the content of one is not appropriate in this context. Moving over, you can see 2 TV shows. One is Planet Earth, which you can probably see, being a biologist, there will be some relevance in terms of how I teach. But the second one, Doctor Who, you're probably thinking less so, though I'd argue perhaps in science communication there is a good angle there. But here it's about context. So content and context. No one would batter an eyelid about a talk that said using books in higher education teaching. No one batters an eyelid about using TV in higher education teaching. But for some reason, when you say, I want to use games in higher education teaching, people take real umbrage with it. But I think games, as long as the content and context are right, are just as viable as these 2 techniques. So that's my first argument.
To the left is a photo of Ian with a large question mark in a thought bubble above him. To his right is a large gold clip art arrow pointing downward, labelled Game Mechanics. To the right of the gold arrow, the word goal is at the top and the word rules at the bottom, where the arrow is pointing. Between the words goal and rules is the word feedback, with 2 curved golden arrows creating a circle around it, one arrow pointing back up toward goal, the other down toward rules. On the right-hand side is a similar grouping. This time a large red arrow points downward, labelled pedagogic tools. At the top is learning outcomes, and at the bottom, where the arrow points, is assessment. Between learning outcomes and assessment is once again the word feedback, enclosed in a circle of arrows. This time red, one pointing up to learning outcomes and one down to assessment.
My second argument is just thinking very broadly about pedagogic tools. So pedagogic, apologise to those who don't know what that word means. Pedagogic is just a very general word which means teaching effectively, so teaching tools. So when I'm deciding how I want to get an outcome, what I want the students to learn by the end of an activity, I design the learning outcomes. And when I've finished with whatever it is I want to do, I normally have to assess them. And the reason I assess them, so you're probably thinking things like essays and videos and exams, I have to check that they have got and understood those learning outcomes. Whilst I'm doing the thing that I do, I'm giving them feedback all the time. So I'm informing them what they've done, how they can improve, and they're getting feedback from each other as well. So that's the typical example. But I think games are absolutely parallel to that. So at the start of a game, you have a goal. So let's think of a game. Let's think of Monopoly. Okay, so Monopoly is a great example here. The goal is to be the property lord and have a big empire with loads of cash. That's the goal that you're aspiring to. But you can't do anything you like. You can't just take all the money from the bank. There are rules, okay? You have to go around the board in a certain order. You have to buy houses, then hotels. So these are akin to the assessment in a way, the structure within you do. And of course, games have loads of feedback. You get feedback from your actions yourself, but also the most important part of a game is often talking over the top of the game, talking about what's going on and what you're going to be doing. So I think game mechanics have got an absolute parallel to any kind of pedagogic tool that you want to use in a learning and teaching experience. Excuse me for 2 seconds. So games in higher education.
This slide is labelled Games in HE. A clip art disc is on the left featuring 6 buttons of different colours with blue, red, yellow, brown, green and orange. A card with the word genus features 6 ovals with these same colours. From top to bottom they are labelled simulations, role play, case studies, quizzes, card games and board games.
So games in higher education have been used for a long time. And this slide here just shows 6 examples of types of games. And those of you who are thinking, I can't see myself using games in any of my sessions, I'm pretty certain you've used a quiz at least once. A quiz is an incredibly common a teaching tool. But things like simulations and role play have been used for donkey's years, particularly in medical health education, as a very viable technique. Role play, I don't mean dressing up with a sword and running around. I mean, things like a mock interview is a form of role play. You're giving students, you're fabricating an experience for the students like the real world. Of course, the types of games that I'm really interested in are card games and board games for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. One thing you notice I haven't mentioned on there is computer games. And that's not because I don't see the value of computer games in higher education or any of the more advanced augmented or virtual reality games. It's just that I personally don't have the skill set to design those games. And I've learned over the years that students are very intolerant of poor quality digital products, as in they see lots of examples of it, perhaps which they play recreationally. So they don't like a poor quality electronic product, but they're much more tolerant of a cereal box type card game or board game. The kind of retro feel to that is still appealing to them. And of course I can design those myself.
A large red arrow points from left to right across the top of the screen, labelled micro at the left, meso in the middle and macro at the right where it's pointing. Along the bottom of the arrow, it's labelled part of class, class, module, programme and institutional. Under each of those words is an image of a game. So what I'd like to do now is just give you some examples of games that come from my own and my colleagues' experiences of games which have been used. And I've broken them down into kind of levels, games which are used just for a small fraction of a second in a class, up the way up to a module or a program, or even a game that can transform behaviour at the institutional level. So let's go. This slide is titled Who Wants to Be a ... So
let's start off with a quiz. My quiz has only got one question, and I want to see what you've learnt so far, or what you need to know. These questions are illustrative of the level in the computer exam.
A quiz screen from the TV game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Question 1 is on the screen with a value of £100.
My question is to you. Which of these is the oldest board game? Is it A, Scrabble, B, Monopoly, C, Battleships, or D, Cluedo? So hopefully one of the voices from beyond has posted in the chat box the letters A, B, C and D. And all I want you to do is use the little thumbs up icon to click whether you think the answer is A, Scrabble, B, Monopoly, C, Battleships, or D, Cluedo. So this is obviously a quiz, and this quiz is taken from the template of the popular ITV game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I used it a lot when I started teaching, then Who Wants to Be a Millionaire disappeared off our screens, and thankfully it's come back now so I can use it again. So hopefully by now you've all voted on either A, B, C or D, and I'll ask one of the voices from beyond just to let me know what the most popular answer is, if possible.
So the votes are just coming in, Ian. We're between A and C at the moment. C's just hitting ahead of A. Okay,
thank you very much. So it's interesting. So most of you think the answer is A, Scrabble, or C, battleships. Well, the answer is, I'll tell you after the break. Some of you probably groaned there. I can almost hear them reverberating through my laptop.
A clothes line with 3 Polaroid images pegged onto it. The first image is a question from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The central image shows a drawing of 3 contestants on the game show Blockbusters. One of these is red, the other 2 are blue. The right image shows a contestant on a TV game show being asked multiple choice question.
So what I've done there is a quiz, a standard quiz that is in every teaching session up and down the country every single day. And I've just added an element of gamemanship to it. So I really like quizzes. Now, when you say we're going to do a quiz, you normally hear this noise coming from the auditorium. Ooh, quiz. But whilst you're giving the questions out, even if they're sitting there like this, I know in here they are thinking about the answers to those questions. And if you're really clever with your question design, it's one reason I like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. There's all sorts of learning you can get going on. So first of all, with Millionaire, as you may be aware, the questions get more difficult as you go through. So you can stagger the questions, start with ones that you feel the majority of students will be able to answer to breed some confidence. I also like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire because it's got 3 wrong answers. So even if a student doesn't know what the correct answer is, they may be able to identify 1 or more incorrect answers. And when I do these quizzes, I don't care at all whether the students talk about the answers, because ultimately I want them to get them all right. I want them to understand it. And of course, I normally play the music, the dun, 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 perhaps even dim the lights while they do it, adds to a sense of drama. It changes the behaviour, how they interact with the quiz. And I always do that terrible gag, what my daughters would call a dad joke, about telling you after the break what the answer is. And I tell you what, if I ever forget to do so, there's always a plethora out their hands at the end of the session asking me the answer to the questions. So those Millionaire slides are templates I use a lot. I also use a host of others, and these are just 3 of them. I like to use Blockbusters, remember that, for small group tutorials. And my favourite one is definitely a national lottery game called 100 versus 1. So you simply walk in the classroom and say to the students, if you're able, please stand. Then you ask a question like the one you can see on the board. You ask them for 10 seconds to think of the answer. Then you reveal the answer, and anyone who gets the answer incorrect sits down. Then you repeat the question, getting more difficult with the questions until you have only 1 person left standing, or you've gone through your pool of questions. And it's amazing what a bar of chocolate does to the person who's standing at the very end. And I like this game for the same reasons as Millionaire, but with the additional example, if a student doesn't want to play, they can simply sit down after the first question, or they can remain sitting to start with. So just examples of using quizzes on the macro level. By the way, if there's any other academics in the room, they'd like a copy of these quiz slides, then they can have them. Okay, now to a whole session.
A screenshot of the computer game Plague Inc. A world map shaded red with a large biohazard symbol on it. Dotted around the world are anchor symbols for ports and aeroplane symbols for airports.
So this is an example that comes from work with Michael Sweet and Louise Robinson, using a commercial off-the-shelf game called Plague Inc. Now, the purpose of Plague Inc. is to wipe out the entire population of the Earth using either a bacteria or virus, adapting it and modifying it to dodge the treatments and cures that the humans come up with. Now, I do realise that this game at the current moment we're in is not particularly sensitive, though we did this work well before the current COVID pandemic. So the way we use this game in class is twofold. First of all, we invite students to play the Plague Inc. game, but making a note of what they've done to their bacteria or virus in order to modify it. We give them a time limit, then we ask them to report back on their experiences, what percentage of the Earth they've killed and what they did to their virus. Well, I only managed to get all this many, and I started in Australia, and I used a waterborne virus. And this is the first discussion about the transmission of epidemics and pandemics. We then repeat the experience, but this time we set up an experimental hypothesis and ask the student to control specific variables. So we'll all start in a certain country, perhaps, but we'll only use either waterborne or airborne viruses and look at the difference from those. Once again, to consolidate the learning and teaching about epidemics and pandemic spread. And it's a very successful session. Students always really enjoy it. And do you know the one thing I love about this, and some of the other examples I'm going to give? Students always tell us that they carry on playing the game afterwards. Okay, they carry on playing the game afterwards. Third example is kind of at the module level. So this game is called Park Life.
The main image is a tabletop with a board game featuring black and white cubes, pretend money, and a board with dice on it. At the top left is inset a photo of a classroom with Ian teaching people who are playing the game.
And it's designed by my colleague Louise Robinson. I'm only been involved in the evaluation and helping disseminate the game itself. So this is a copy of the game. Louise designed it on cardboard boxes initially. And she had a really difficult challenge of trying to teach a revision session to a group of students at the very end of a module, whilst also introducing a new theme linked to her expertise. And she designed this game called Park Life. So after a few cardboard editions, we managed to get a nice copy made. And the idea is the students go around their own conservation park, trying to build up a genetic unique population, recording the pedigree tree, whilst avoiding the threats and perils that inhibit such a park. So I've seen this game played many times, and it's absolutely amazing. So it's a 2 hour or so session. The game often takes a bit longer, and the students almost always stay beyond the end of the session to carry on the learning. They want to finish the game. What's doubly interesting is that whilst they're playing the game, they are talking non-stop about wildlife conservation and associated topics. So the learning that they get from the game may be small, but the learning they get from talking with each other about the game is astronomical. You find me any academic who would not take the offer of saying, okay, well, I can get your students to stay longer than they need to be and talk non-stop about the topic of today. Everyone would take that. Well, this game is one example of how that can be delivered. Moving up in terms of kind of other skills, this is an idea I'm very, very proud of. Once again with Louise.
A Dungeons and Dragons style computerized plan of a series of rooms. A curved green arrow shows a progression through the rooms from skill acquisition to skill presentation. On the right is a sheet of paper with space to write the statistics of the character students are playing.
So this is using tabletop role-playing games, in this case Dungeons and Dragons, as a tool for developing employability skills in students. So the students are guided through a role-playing adventure where they have to undertake a series of puzzles, problem-based learning, lateral thinking puzzles, working together, before they get to the end of the little adventure where they have to face a final guardian and have to present what skills they've learned. So the game is really a metaphor for collecting skills and putting them on your CV. That's the journey through the dungeon. And then presenting your skills to the guardian is an analogue for the job interview itself. We've run this several times, including at some external organisations, and it's always been incredibly powerful. And the people who enjoy it most are definitely those who've never played role-playing games before or Dungeons and Dragons. That work is being written up at the minute.
To the left is an image of a hand writing with a pen at the top of a guide for Assessment the Game. To the right are 3 cards in a pile. The top one says Google Storm. The next is titled Think, Pair, Share. The third is titled Creative Time Wasting.
And finally, at the whole institution kind of level, my current role working in a central unit at the university has given more opportunities. So earlier this year, I published with Advanced HE Assessment the Game, which is a tool to get people thinking about creative and different ways to design assessments that can be used in higher education. and a sneaky peek of something that's coming out later on this year, which is a series of 52 playing cards, which I've designed with Stuart and Jasmine from Advanced HE on toolkits for engaging students. So short tricks for engaging students. So games have this ability to enhance us as staff as well as students. So the last little part of my talk is just about how do you make a good game.
This slide is titled 10 Things Every Game Needs. A series of boxes in dark blue, light blue and grey make a meandering shape across the screen from start to finish. The things listed are goals, rules, interaction, catch-up, inertia, surprise, strategy, fun, flavour and hook.
You know, how do you make a good game? And these 10 things that you can see on this slide here are 10 things that every game needs. And these are abridged from a series of articles by Mark Rosewater, who's the lead researcher and designer at Magic the Gathering. And when I was putting together this talk and looking at this list of 10 things every game needs, I thought, do you know what? I think actually my overall approach to teaching does resonate very much with these 10 things I think every game needs. Let me explain. So I kind of see this as my game board. So this large lecture theatre.
A photo of a large lecture theatre filled with students. A lecturer stands at the front and on a large screen behind them is a projection of their handwriting. At the top right of the photo is a clip art image showing 3 computer screens with people on them in video chat.
I just chose the one with the complicated maths on it because it looks cool. Though I guess my game board now is more like the digital screens you can see at the top. So that's my game board, that's my canvas. And those 10 things that every game needs really do resonate with how I approach teaching. So the first thing I think that's quite important to me is the narrative.
This slide is labelled narrative. A large blue eye at the bottom left has 3 red arrows coming out to different pictures. The first, in a thought cloud shape, shows Red Riding Hood by a bed with someone hiding from her under the duvet. Next is the same image, but instead of being in a thought cloud, it's showing on a TV set. The final image is Red Riding Hood, except this time, Red Riding Hood has Ian's face.
So if you imagine a story, and the story here I've chosen is Little Red Riding Hood, you can tell someone the story that they can imagine it. You can show them the story on a medium, and here's a TV, you know, second person, they can see it. But I really like putting people as part of the story, so they are actually part of the adventure themselves. So here I've become Little Red Riding Hood. So the third person narrative. Now I think all of those have a place in higher education, but in games, the third person being part of the story, sorry, the first person being part of the story is the really important one. I mean, let me give you a real example. It really shows this. A game design workshop I did it with in Leeds. Somebody was trying to design a game about clinical skills, and they had an idea where the learning outcome was for students to be presented with a set of patient symptoms, and they had to come up with the correct medical diagnosis. And they did have a time limit for coming up with the correct diagnosis, and the game just didn't work. You know, the students didn't really enjoy it. So what we did was took the same game and just completely changed the narrative. It's 5 minutes to midnight and a patient's just stumbled through the doors of H&E. It's 15 minutes before you end your shift. You've got to quickly diagnose them. You get the idea. By just putting a bit of narrative and story around it, suddenly the students feel it. They feel that they're doing something for a purpose, and that purpose really changes the way they interact with the game. Now, narrative for me can also be about the way that you tell the story. Let me give you an example. So first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit of Red Riding Hood. Oh, Grandma, what big ears you have. All the better to hear you with, my dear. Same story again. Oh, Grandma, what big ears you have. All the better to hear you with, my dear. Okay, you may think I'm just putting on a silly voice there, but actually the way you tell the story really sells the story. You can have the best story in the world, but if you don't tell it right, then no one's going to be interested. So those two elements really resonate with all aspects of my teaching. The other thing that strikes me from games, which parallels teaching, is the role of strategy and surprise.
This slide is titled Strategy and Surprise. To the left, a Monopoly board in a speech bubble above a clip art picture of two people with a wall between them stood over the word conflict. In the middle, a world map with the word pandemic sits in a speech bubble over a clip art picture of two people holding hands, stood over the word cooperation. On the right is a red 20-sided die.
So when people think of games, they often think of games like Monopoly, which are all about conflict. So where players are competing against each other for an end goal. In fact, these types of games are often known as American board games, no pun intended here. When in fact, many games are based on cooperation or working together. So a great example of that is Pandemic. You're all one team and you have to work together to achieve a common goal. So I think both conflict and cooperation have a place in higher education. But for me, cooperation is the key one, the one I love. Seeing students as partners in the game or in the learning experience. And in my science communication module, I definitely learn as much from the students as they do from me. Well, I think they do anyway. And it's both frightening and exhilarating to sometimes go into a session and actually not know what we're going to be doing for the second half, and letting the students work together to dictate that. Just like a good game, a good dice roll, we also need a bit of surprise, and I think that's really important in teaching as well. I mean, a term which I don't know if I've coined, but I use it quite a lot, is what I call plausible disruption. Occasionally you just need to mix things up a little bit. And a simple example of this is, of course, acknowledging any anxiety issues that this may cause, is mixing up groups in class. Students invariably go and sit in exactly the same place, in exactly the same seats, and with the same group of people. By mixing them up into different groups, you can stimulate different conversations, and the benefit for the majority there is greater than if they've stayed in those groups. My third one is about rules.
This slide is titled Rules. A big red book titled The Rule Book sits on top of an open clip art book. Scrabble letters spell out the word confused underneath a photo of a finger pointing to a jumble of letters.
So learning and teaching has got a massive rule book. I mean, it's probably fair to say that the rule book hasn't changed much since the 1900s in terms of what you can and can't do. It's full of all sorts of historic legacies. And I've always been one for kind of challenging the rule book a little bit and trying things that are a bit different, working around the rules and adapting the rules to fit the needs of yourself and the needs of your students. And I firmly believe that. But rules have to be written right. The way that you explain things needs to be very careful. And this feeds into the narrative. Let me give you an example. So one thing I really dislike personally is when you hear people say things like, okay, welcome students to my class. Okay, we've got a difficult concept to tackle today. So the word difficult is a word that will put off some students. They will think they can't achieve the outcome because you've used that word. Perhaps even worse is if we say to students, okay, we're going to start with an easy problem now. I mean, you're saying it's easy, but what if a student can't get that right? What does it do to them for the rest of their engagement with the session? And the number one rule word that you should never use is this one. Okay, so we're going to go through some slides now. This bit is quite boring, but we just need to get through it. Boring? If it's boring, then do something about it. Okay, so we have to be very careful of the language we use in our rule book in order to change the behaviour, as I mentioned. And the absolute final element of games, so I can't talk about them all today, is fun.
This slide is titled Fun. 4 photographs. First is Ian in a yellow hard hat teaching in a lecture theatre, stood in front of a washing line with pictures and paper plates pegged to it. Next is 2 people stood opposite each other, both are smiling to the camera and both are wearing a pink mitten on one hand and a blue mitten on the other. Next is Ian doing a handstand, being helped by somebody holding his legs in the air. Last of all is a square featuring photos of Ian posing and having fun in a variety of headgear, including a horned Viking helmet.
So I started with fun. I'm getting quite close to the end now. And fun, for me, is absolutely fundamental to my experience. And this is just a bit of a rogues gallery that I've nicked off various Twitter posts of me doing things. You will note that the handstand is only done with the aid of a student holding me up. And Paul did mention the Viking hat at the beginning. So there you go. I've still got the Viking hat here today. I mean, that fun really resonates through as much of my teaching as I can as possible. And if I get fed up of what I'm doing, I change it and do something different the next year. Of course, my life is about more than a game.
This slide is titled More Than a Game. A red wooden figure has a clip art party hat on. Behind it are a blue, green and yellow wooden person. There are 3 speech bubbles over the figures. The first says, working with an international collaborative writing group on sharing SOTL with students. The middle one says, leading the UOD NTF scheme and celebrating the success of 3 candidates in 3 years. The third one says, co-lead on 2 national collaborative networks to support remote working, #Dry Labs Real Science and #Remote Forensic CSI.
And I colluded this slide deliberately because sometimes being somebody who likes to dress up and be a bit theatrical, that's all you get known for. I mean, I have heard the words like clown and a bit of a fool before, but much of my work is very strategic and in other areas. Paul kindly mentioned the national networks I've done with Nigel, David, Rachel and Lisa, which I'm incredibly proud of and the impact they've had on society. I'm also incredibly proud of the research I'm undertaking with my colleagues across the globe, some of whom are with us today, looking how we share the findings of scholarships and teaching and learning with students. There's much I'm proud about in my role with CEL, but I think in the last 6 months, I'm most proud of leading the University Derby National Teaching Fellowship Scheme and seeing 3 very, very deserved candidates reap their awards and get their success. So with 3 slides to go, I think this slide needs to be about the end game.
This slide is titled Endgame. To the top left is a drawing of several Marvel characters. A photo shows a hand in the centre holding playing cards with 5 aces.
And what's next for me? So if this is a card game, you'd see that there are 5 aces there. Now you know that game is therefore rigged. It's unfair. Now, would you play a game if it was unfair? No. How about, would you design a game or take part in a game if you knew it was unfair to other players? Hopefully the answer's no as well. Well, higher education, if you consider the metaphor of game, is unfair to many. The attainment of all students is not equal. And in the last 2 years, especially, the transformational work of my colleagues, particularly Tamsin Bowers-Brown, has really shown me the true extent of the problems we have in the whole higher education sector. Perhaps I knew about them before, but just didn't see them properly. But now I know about them, to not do anything is completely unacceptable. And I think that applies to all of my academic colleagues out there as well. It's not acceptable for you to do nothing either. I'll be honest with you, I'm absolutely petrified and scared about what I can do to help, but really I see that as the challenge that myself, CEL and the university should be driving ahead on. So my penultimate slide is my second set of thank yous.
Wooden Scrabble letters spell out the words thank you.
So these thank yous are around my family, and I'm just going to say a few words about them. So I'd like to thank, first of all, my sisters, all my cousins, my aunties, my grandma, Rosie, for all the support they've given me over the years. I've got a very close family group and it's really, really warming. I'd also like to thank my 2 little kids. Hope I didn't embarrass you too much, kids. I haven't done any dancing yet. I'd also like to thank my wife. I mean, she really has been and always will be the kind of air beneath my wings, which allowed me to be successful. I have to just say a word about some absent people. So unfortunately, my mum passed away 5 years ago, before I became a professor. It was a difficult time. I've grown from it. We've all grown from it. We're all happy again now, but I'm sure she's looking down on us now. And at this point, I'd just like to say a word of thanks to another member of staff, which is Paul. Thanks, Paul, for everything over the years. And the reason I'm mentioning you now is to thank you specifically for how you dealt with that moment in my life. I don't think you get enough acknowledgement for your compassion and understanding, but you're exemplary in the way that you looked after me then. I'd also like to mention my granddad. So when I was 8 years old, my nickname for my granddad was the Prof, He always used to call me the prof. And it was absolute honour to be able to tell him only a week before he passed that I'd made it and I'd become a professor. So cheers, Grandad. And my last thanks goes to one person. So when I was a young boy, it was quite difficult growing up through reasons we don't need to talk about here. But this person had to work 6 and 7 days a week, every single week, doing 18-hour days, and missed out on large parts of our growing up, sacrificing every penny so I could go to university. I've seen them so tired on a Sunday that they actually fell asleep eating their roast dinner, mid-dinner. Those times are past and we're all happy again now, but I haven't forgot it. So this one's for you, Dad. Cheers, mate.
The University of Derby logo appears featuring 3 hills. Text says, find out more about research at Derby, derby.ac.uk.